You must understand this first, and without emotion, life is not unfair. It is indifferent. It does not hate you. It does not favor you. It does not pause for your pain, and it does not reward your excuses. It simply moves forward with or without your permission. And the moment you accept this truth, you stop begging reality to change and start changing yourself instead. Because the Stoic mind does not waste energy asking why suffering exists. It asks how to remain solid while suffering passes through, like fire passing through steel and leaving it stronger, not weaker, because the unbreakable person is not the one who avoids pain, but the one who refuses to be shaped by it. The one who wakes up every day knowing that discomfort is not an enemy, but a training ground, knowing that every insult, every loss, every delay, every rejection is an opportunity to practice control over the only thing that truly belongs to him, his response. And this is where power begins, not in dominance over others, not in loud confidence, not in external validation, but in the quiet ability to remain composed when chaos demands panic, to remain disciplined when comfort whispers surrender, to remain focused when distractions multiply, because the world will test you endlessly. It will provoke you through people, through failures, through loneliness, through slow progress. And every test asks the same question in a different form. Will you react like a slave to emotion or respond like a master of self? And the Stoic chooses mastery every time, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts, because he knows that emotions are temporary storms, but character is permanent architecture, built decision by decision, moment by moment, choice by choice, and no one sees this construction happening. No applause follows discipline. No crowd cheers consistency. No one congratulates you for resisting impulses in silence. But that is precisely why it works, because strength developed in silence cannot be stolen by noise. And while others chase motivation, the Stoic build systems, routines, and principles that function even when motivation dies, because motivation is a visitor but discipline is a resident. And the unbreakable person does not depend on mood, inspiration, or perfect conditions. He moves forward tired, uncertain, uncelebrated. Because progress does not require confidence. It requires commitment. And commitment is proven not on good days, but on days when everything feels heavy and pointless and slow. And this is where most people quit. Not because they are weak, but because they have never been taught that endurance itself is a skill. One that can be trained, sharpened, and mastered. And once you realize this, you stop labeling hardship as failure and start seeing it as resistance training for the mind. And just like muscles grow under tension, mental strength grows under pressure, and pressure is guaranteed, pain is guaranteed, loss is guaranteed, but collapse is optional. Because nothing outside you has the authority to decide who you become unless you hand it that power willingly. And the Stoic never hands over authority, not to praise, not to blame, not a success, not a failure, because external events are unstable foundations, and only an internal code can hold weight when everything else shakes. And this code is simple but brutal. Control what you can, release what you cannot, act with virtue regardless of outcome, and accept reality without complaint, because complaining does not change facts. It only reveals weakness. And the unbreakable person is not emotionless. He feels deeply, but he does not obey feelings blindly. He observes them, understands them, and then decides whether they deserve action. And most of the time they do not, because impulse is expensive, regret costs more than patience ever will, and every time you delay gratification, every time you choose long-term integrity over short-term relief, you are reinforcing an identity that cannot be shaken by circumstance. And over time, people will notice something different about you, not because you speak differently, but because you react differently, not because you dominate conversations, but because you dominate yourself. And that is the highest form of power available to a human being, a power that does not depend on money, status, or approval, a power that cannot be taken, broken, or diminished, because it was forged intentionally through discomfort, silence, and relentless self-honesty. And once you become unbreakable in this way, Life does not become easier, but you become stronger than what life throws at you, and that is the only victory that actually lasts. Becoming unbreakable does not mean becoming invincible or untouched by pain. It means becoming someone who is no longer ruled by circumstances, emotions, or the opinions of others, because the Stoic understand that life will always apply pressure, sometimes gently, sometimes violently, and the question is never whether pressure will come, but whether you have trained yourself to hold your shape under it. And most people have not. They bend, they leak energy, they react impulsively, they collapse inward, because they built their identity on comfort, validation, and outcomes they cannot control. And the moment those things are threatened, their sense of self begins to fracture. But the unbreakable person builds differently. He builds inward, slowly, deliberately, on principles instead of moods, on discipline instead of motivation, on self-respect instead of approval. And this makes him dangerous in a quiet way, because he does not need external stability to remain stable. Internally, and this is rare, because it requires accepting a hard truth most people avoid, that no one is coming to save you, no explanation will be given for your suffering, no fairness will be guaranteed, and no applause will follow your endurance. And once you accept this without bitterness, you stop wasting energy on resentment and start investing it in control, because control is the only real power available to a human being. Control over attention, over reactions, over habits, over choices made when no one is watching. And this is where unbreakability is forged, not in dramatic moments, but in ordinary days where you choose discipline over comfort, silence over reaction, effort over excuses. Because every small decision either trains you to endure or conditions you to escape. And escape feels good in the moment, but expensive in the long run, while endurance feels heavy now, but pays dividends later in the form of confidence that does not depend on outcomes. And the Stoic values this kind of confidence above all else, because it cannot be shaken by failure or inflated by success. It is stable, grounded, earned, and when setbacks arrive, as they always do, the unbreakable person does not interpret them as signs to stop, but as proof that he is still in the arena, still moving, still alive. And instead of asking, why is this happening to me? He asks, what does this demand from me? Because responsibility sharpens the mind while blame dulls it, and this shift in thinking is what separates strength from fragility. Because fragile people need life to cooperate in order to function, but the unbreakable person functions regardless, tired or rested, praised or ignored, winning or losing, because his actions are guided by internal code, not external feedback. And this code does not change when conditions change, which is why pressure reveals character rather than creating it. And once you have endured enough without abandoning your principles, something irreversible happens. You stop fearing difficulty. You stop dramatizing obstacles. You stop negotiating with discomfort, and you move forward with a calm intensity that others can feel but cannot explain, because they're still dependent on motivation while you're operating on commitment. And commitment does not require enthusiasm. It requires decision renewed daily, sometimes hourly, especially when progress is slow and invisible. And this is where most people quit, not because they are incapable, but because they confuse lack of reward with lack of value. And the Stoic never makes this mistake. He knows that the most important work happens in obscurity, in silence, in repetition, and over time this consistency builds something solid inside him, something that does not crack under insult, does not swell under praise, does not panic under uncertainty. And this is what it truly means to become unbreakable. Not that life stops hitting you, but that nothing it throws can knock you out of alignment with who you have decided to be. Becoming unbreakable also means accepting that strength is built when no one is watching and nothing feels rewarding, because the Stoic knows that the mind is shaped most powerfully not in moments of victory, but in stretches of monotony, doubt, and quiet struggle where progress is slow and feedback is absent. And this is exactly where most people abandon themselves, mistaking boredom for failure and difficulty for a sign that they are on the wrong path, when in reality these are conditions under which real resilience is formed, because ease never demands discipline, and comfort never asks you to define your values. But hardship forces clarity. It asks you what you stand for when there is no immediate payoff, and the unbreakable person answers through action, not explanation, showing up again and again even when enthusiasm is gone. Because enthusiasm is unreliable, but principle is not. And this is why Stoicism emphasizes duty over desire, because desire fluctuates with mood and circumstance, while duty anchors behavior regardless of internal weather. And over time, this consistency builds an internal stability that cannot be disrupted by chaos outside. And when things go wrong, as they inevitably will, the unbreakable person does not spiral into overthinking or self-doubt. He narrows his focus to the next controllable action, because clarity under pressure is not a talent. It is a trained habit, and habits determine outcomes long after emotions fade. And this is what gives a Stoic an unfair advantage. Not intelligence, not luck, but composure, the ability to remain deliberate when others become reactive. And this composure is often misunderstood as coldness, but it is not the absence of feeling. It is a refusal to be ruled by feeling, because emotions are information, not commands, and the unbreakable person listens without obeying blindly, choosing reason over impulse even when impulse is loud, persuasive and tempting, because every impulsive reaction weakens internal authority, while every restrained response strengthens it. And authority over the self is the only authority that lasts, since everything external, status, money, relationships, reputation, can be altered or removed without warning. And once you accept this impermanence fully, you stop clinging, you stop panicking, you stop defining yourself by what you might lose. And this freedom from attachment makes you harder to manipulate, harder to intimidate, harder to break. Because fear only works on those who have something they're unwilling to lose. And the Stoic trains himself to value character above all else, knowing that character cannot be taken, only surrendered. And so even when life strips away comfort, security, or recognition, he remains intact because his worth was never stored in those places to begin with. And this creates a quiet confidence that does not seek validation or dominance, a confidence that does not announce itself but is felt in presence, in posture, in decisions made without hesitation or apology. And people sense this stability instinctively, because it is rare in a world addicted to stimulation and reassurance. And the deeper you go on this path, the less you need external motivation, because you're no longer chasing a feeling, you are fulfilling a standard. And standards do not negotiate. They simply wait for you to meet them or fall short. And each day you choose to meet them despite discomfort. You reinforce an identity that does not crumble under pressure. And this is a final truth of becoming unbreakable. Not that you eliminate struggle, but that struggle no longer defines or destabilizes you. It becomes background noise while you move forward with calm resolve, aligned with your principles, unshaken by outcomes, and committed to the long path regardless of how difficult or lonely it becomes. Becoming unbreakable ultimately requires you to accept a reality most people avoid for their entire lives, that comfort weakens faster than hardship strengthens. And if you're not intentionally training your mind, the world will train it for you in far harsher ways, because life does not wait for readiness. It exposes unprepared minds through pressure, loss, humiliation, and delay. And the Stoic chooses preparation over surprise, choosing voluntary difficulty today to avoid involuntary collapse tomorrow, because strength borrowed from easy conditions disappears the moment those conditions change, but strength earned through resistance stays. And this is why the unbreakable person is not reckless, emotional, or reactive. He is precise, controlled, and deliberate, understanding that energy is limited and must not be wasted on things that do not matter, such as proving oneself to others, arguing with reality, or chasing validation that expires quickly. And instead, he invests that energy into sharpening judgment, reinforcing habits, and aligning actions with long-term values. Because values create direction when emotions create confusion. And confusion is where most people get stuck, oscillating between hope and despair depending on external feedback, while the Stoic remains steady, not because outcomes always favor him, But because his identity is not tied to outcomes at all, it is tied to conduct, to how he behaves under stress, how he speaks under provocation, how he works under fatigue, and how he decides when no one is watching. And over time, this consistency creates something most people never experience: a sense of internal sovereignty, the knowledge that regardless of what happens, you will respond with discipline rather than panic, intention rather than impulse. And this knowledge removes fear at its root, because fear thrives on uncertainty about one's own reaction. And once you trust yourself completely, threats lose their psychological power, because you no longer need life to be gentle in order to remain functional. And this independence from circumstance makes you difficult to manipulate, difficult to pressure, and difficult to break, since manipulation only works on those who crave approval or comfort more than integrity. And the Stoics sacrifices neither, understanding that integrity is not a performance but a private agreement with oneself, upheld daily through action. And this is why becoming unbreakable feels lonely at times, because it requires walking away from shortcuts, excuses, and emotional indulgences that others normalize. But loneliness is a small price to pay for self-respect, and the unbreakable person chooses self-respect every time, because he knows that once it is lost, no achievement can replace it. And as this identity solidifies, life's chaos begins to feel smaller, not because it disappears, but because it no longer dictates internal order. And when crises arrive, as they inevitably will, you move through them with calm efficiency, not dramatizing pain, not resisting reality, not asking for fairness, but adapting quickly and continuing forward, because forward movement, however slow, preserves dignity, and dignity preserved under pressure becomes confidence that does not need explanation. And this is a quiet endpoint of Stoic strength, not dominance over others, not immunity to suffering, but mastery over the self so complete that no circumstance can force you out of alignment with who you have chosen to be. Becoming unbreakable also means learning to stand still when everything inside you wants to run, to speak, to react, to escape the weight of the moment. Because most damage is not done by what happens to you, but by how quickly you try to get away from it. And the Stoic refuses his reflex, understanding that avoidance trains fragility while endurance trains authority. And authority over the self is the only authority that cannot be challenged, because when you rush to comfort, you teach your mind that discomfort is dangerous. But when you remain present under pressure, you teach it that discomfort is survivable, manageable, and temporary. And this lesson compounds over time into calm. And calm under pressure is not passive. It is lethal in its effectiveness, because it allows you to see clearly while others are blinded by emotion, to decide slowly while others rush into regret. And this clarity becomes a strategic advantage in every area of life, from work to relationships to personal growth, because the unbreakable person does not leak energy through overthinking, complaining, or emotional bargaining with reality. He conserves it, channels it, and applies it only where it creates progress, knowing that wasted energy cannot be recovered, and that discipline is not about doing more, but about doing what matters without distraction or drama. And this is why Stoicism values restraint so highly, because restraint keeps you aligned when temptation tries to pull you off course. And temptation is everywhere, disguised as ease, pleasure, validation, and shortcuts, all of which promise relief now at the cost of weakness later. And the unbreakable person sees through this trade instantly, choosing long-term solidity over short-term escape, even when no one is watching and no reward is guaranteed, because integrity is proven precisely in those moments. And each time you act in alignment with your principles under pressure, you strengthen the internal bond of trust with yourself, and that trust becomes armor. Because once you know you will not betray your standard for comfort, fear loses its grip, anxiety loses its urgency, and doubt loses its voice, since doubt feeds on inconsistency, and consistency starves it. And as this internal structure hardens, you begin to notice that setbacks no longer feel personal, insults no longer feel threatening, and uncertainty no longer feels paralyzing, because your sense of identity is no longer dependent on smooth progress, or external affirmation. It is anchored in conduct, in effort, in the knowledge that regardless of outcome, you will act with discipline and self-respect, and this makes you stable in unstable conditions, which is a true definition of strength, not intensity, not aggression, not dominance, but reliability under stress. And people sense this reliability instinctively because it is rare in a world built on reaction and impulse. And over time, this steadiness creates momentum, quiet. Momentum that does not announce itself, but carries you forward relentlessly. Because while others are constantly restarting after emotional collapse, you are simply continuing, step after step, day after day, without needing motivation, permission, or reassurance. And this ability to continue without drama is what ultimately makes you unbreakable. Because life can delay you, challenge you, and exhaust you, but it cannot stop you unless you surrender internally. And the Stoic never does, choosing instead to remain aligned, disciplined, and composed until pressure itself gives way. Becoming unbreakable is a slow acceptance that no external structure, no routine, no relationship, no achievement can substitute for internal order, because the moment pressure increases, everything external becomes unreliable. Schedules collapse, people disappoint, plans fail, and only the strength of your internal discipline determines whether you remain functional or fragment. And this is why the Stoic places such ruthless emphasis on self-governance, on knowing precisely what he will tolerate, what he will ignore, and what he will act on, because boundaries that are not clearly defined internally are easily violated externally. And the unbreakable person does not wait for crisis to discover who he is. He decides in advance through principles that do not bend under emotion, because emotion is temporary, but consequences are permanent. And every emotional decision carries a cost that discipline would have avoided. And over time, this awareness creates restraint, not suppression, but intelligent restraint, the kind that pauses before reaction and asks whether this response serves long-term alignment or short-term relief. And the Stoic almost always chooses alignment, even when it costs comfort, even when it costs popularity, even when it costs ease, because ease is the most expensive currency in the long run, quietly eroding resilience while offering nothing durable in return. And the unbreakable person understands that a life built on comfort will eventually collapse under pressure, while a life built on discipline can absorb shock without losing shape. And this is why he treats difficulty not as misfortune, but as calibration, a way of testing whether his habits, mindset, and values are strong enough to hold under load. And when they are not, he does not complain, he adjusts. Because adaptation is strength without ego, and ego is what breaks people more often than. Pain never does. Ego that demands fairness, recognition, explanation, or reward, all of which life refuses to guarantee. And once ego is removed from the equation, endurance becomes simpler, because you're no longer offended by hardship, you're no longer surprised by resistance, you're no longer discouraged by slow progress. You expect these things as part of the process, and expectation reduces emotional shock, and reduced shock preserves clarity, and clarity allows action even in difficult conditions. And action maintained over time builds momentum that does not depend on motivation, because motivation is inconsistent, but standards are not. And the Stoic lives by standards that do not negotiate with mood, fatigue, or fear. And this creates a sense of inevitability in his progress, not speed, not ease, but inevitability. The quiet confidence that says, I will continue regardless. And this mindset removes desperation, because desperation comes from attachment to outcomes, and the unbreakable person is attached only to effort and conduct, knowing that outcomes are outside his control. And when outcomes improve, he does not become arrogant, and when they worsen, he does not become bitter, because neither success nor failure alters his internal alignment. And this emotional neutrality is not emptiness, it is stability, the ability to remain centered while circumstances oscillate wildly. And in a world addicted to stimulation, reaction, and reassurance, this stability becomes a rare form of power, one that cannot be taken, rushed, or shaken, because it was built slowly, deliberately, through repeated decisions to endure, rather than escape. to act rather than complain, and to remain loyal to one's principles even when doing so feels lonely, unrewarded, and difficult. And this loyalty to self is the final layer of unbreakability. Because once you know you will not abandon your standards under pressure, nothing external can truly break you. It can only test, delay, and refine you, and refinement, not comfort, is the true goal of the Stoic path. Becoming unbreakable is ultimately the decision to stop negotiating with weakness, because every time you negotiate, you teach it that it has a voice, and once weakness has a voice, it will speak in every difficult moment, disguised as logic, self-care, or timing, telling you to wait, to delay, to soften your standards just this once. And the Stoic recognizes this pattern immediately and cuts it off without emotion, because strength is not built by heroic effort once in a while, but by refusing small compromises every day, the compromises no one sees and no one applauds. And this refusal is what hardens identity over time, because identity is not what you claim to be in words, but what you repeatedly prove in action under resistance. And the unbreakable person proves himself quietly by doing what needs to be done regardless of mood, fatigue, or external encouragement, because encouragement creates dependence, and dependence creates fragility, while self-command creates autonomy, and autonomy is a foundation of Stoic strength, the ability to give yourself orders and follow them even when comfort argues otherwise. And once you develop this internal command structure, life's chaos begins to lose its ability to destabilize you, because you're no longer improvising your values in moments of stress. You are executing them, and execution eliminates hesitation, which is where fear lives, and fear without hesitation cannot grow. And this is why the unbreakable person moves steadily rather than quickly, choosing consistency over intensity, because intensity burns out while consistency compounds, and compounding effort produces results that appear sudden to others but were inevitable to you, because inevitability is born from alignment, from doing the same correct things long enough that outcome becomes a consequence rather than a hope. And the Stoic does not hope his way forward. He works his way forward, accepting that progress will often feel dull, unrewarded, and lonely. And yet he continues, because quitting would cost more than continuing ever will, costing self-respect, momentum, and trust in one's own word. And once self-trust is broken, rebuilding it is far harder than enduring discomfort in the first place. And the unbreakable person understands his cost deeply, which is why he protects his word to himself more fiercely than his image to others. Because image can be repaired, but integrity once lost leaves a permanent fracture. And as this integrity solidifies, you begin to experience a rare kind of calm, not optimism, not excitement, but certainty. The certainty that no matter what happens next, you will respond with discipline rather than collapse, with clarity rather than chaos, and with action rather than excuses. And this certainty removes desperation, because desperation comes from doubting one's own ability to endure. And once that doubt is gone, life's pressure becomes manageable, even instructive, and setbacks become adjustments rather than verdicts, and difficulty becomes feedback rather than punishment. And this perspective shift is what truly completes the process of becoming unbreakable, because you're no longer trying to win against life. You're cooperating with its rules, understanding that resistance builds strength, that effort precedes confidence, and that character is the only asset that survives every circumstance. And when you live this way long enough, something quiet but irreversible happens. You stop fearing what life can do to you, because you know exactly what you will do in response, and that knowledge, earned through discipline and restraint, is the strongest form of armor a human being can wear. Becoming unbreakable is not a moment of transformation, but a lifetime of refusal. The refusal to quit when quitting feels justified. The refusal to soften standards when pressure demands compromise. The refusal to let temporary emotions rewrite permanent values. Because life will test you in ways no speech, book, or mentor can prepare you for. And when that moment comes, motivation will be absent, clarity will feel distant, and comfort will offer itself as an escape, and only one thing will remain: who you have trained yourself to be. And this is why the Stoic path is ruthless in its simplicity, asking you to focus not on becoming impressive, but on becoming reliable, not on feeling strong, but on acting correctly. Because strength that depends on feeling is fragile, but strength built on principle survives fatigue, fear, and failure, and the unbreakable person understands that suffering does not need to be dramatic to be effective. It only needs to be endured without surrender, because surrender is the only true defeat. And every time you endure without abandoning your standards, you quietly widen the distance between who you were and who you are becoming. And over time, this distance becomes identity. An identity that does not beg for validation, does not panic under uncertainty, does not collapse under pressure, because it was built deliberately through resistance, repetition, and restraint. And once you reach this point, life's chaos begins to lose its authority over you, not because it disappears, but because it no longer controls your behavior. And control over behavior is control over destiny, since destiny is nothing more than repeated choices made under pressure. And the Stoic chooses discipline when emotion tempts reaction, silence when ego demands expression, and effort when comfort promises relief. And these choices compound into a presence that is calm, grounded, and immovable, a presence that does not announce strength but radiates it, because it has nothing to prove and nothing to protect except integrity. And integrity does not crack under force. It only reveals itself. And this is a final truth of becoming unbreakable. Not that life stops trying to break you, but that it fails again and again because you have removed its leverage. You have accepted pain without resentment, effort without guarantee, and discipline without applause. And in doing so, you have built something rare and permanent, a self that cannot be negotiated with, intimidated, or dismantled by circumstance, only tested and refined. And that is not just strength, that is freedom. Becoming unbreakable is not about eliminating pain or escaping hardship. It is about removing their authority over you. Because life will always apply pressure, but pressure only breaks what was built on weakness, not what was built on discipline. And once you accept that struggle is permanent but surrender is optional, you stop fearing what life can do to you and start trusting what you can do in response. And this trust is earned, not imagined. Earned through days when you continue without motivation, through moments when silence was harder than reaction, through choices where integrity mattered more than comfort. And over time, these choices harden into identity, an identity that does not collapse under failure or inflate under success, because it is grounded in principle, not outcome. And when you reach this point, life's chaos no longer controls your behavior. It only reveals your strength, because nothing outside you can break what you have discipline within. And that is a final truth of becoming unbreakable.